The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief, DevOps.com, here to welcome you to another DevOps.com webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by our friends at Orca, and this is a pretty hands-on, engineering-focused webinar. So for you tech geeks out there who are hopefully listening in, I think you're going to find this a really, really interesting webinar. But you don't have to be uber engineer to enjoy this one either, actually. There's a lot to learn here. The title of the webinar is The Coming Earthquake in WebSphere Application Server Configure Management. And I guess you can figure out what it's about from there. But let me quickly introduce you to our panel. And you can see their smiling faces here on your screen, hopefully. Robin Fuller, co-founder of Trifedix, and he's the chief software architect at Orca. And Christy McDougall, who leads product engineering. Robin, Christy, welcome.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you so much.
Okay, that was our sound check. Sounds good. Before I hand things over to Christy and Robin, just quick little housekeeping. Number one, we do have time set aside. There's going to be a demo in addition to the slides, but we have time for questions, and we strongly encourage your questions. So if you look in your GoToWebinar control panel, there should be a little section marked questions with a caret or arrow pointing. If you click on that so the arrow points downward, you will see that you can write your question in there. Please do write your questions in there, stream of conscious, as they come into your mind. Because if you're like me, you're liable to forget them by the time it's time to ask questions. By doing so, we have a record of it in the GoToWebinar system. So you're queued in the question queue, as well as if for some reason we weren't able to get to all of the questions, both Christy or Robin can answer your questions, perhaps offline in writing, email, or what have you. So please ask your questions there. If you're having any technical difficulties, maybe the video, or not the video, the slides aren't transitioning, or the audio's not working, please feel free to use the chat section, which should be near the bottom of your webinar control panel, where we have engineers monitoring, standing by, who will try to help you in the case or in the event that you have any problems. Hopefully you won't, though. With that being said, let us get diving right into this. Christy, I'm going to hand it over to you to go from here.
Sounds good. Thank you, Alan.
Okay. All righty.
All right, as Alan said, today we're going to be talking to you about the coming earthquake in WebSphere Application Server Configuration Management. Again, as Alan alluded to, we're going to spend a short time up front going through some slides, but we're going to spend the majority of the time in a live demonstration. And the flow of the slides is going to be Robin and myself will give you a very quick history lesson in configuration management. And then we're going to take you through some trimmers we've seen along the way, and then the coming earthquake in configuration management. And in case anyone is confused, in this case, this is a good earthquake, not a bad earthquake. And then we'll hop into that demo I was talking about. All right, to kick us off, here's that history lesson I promised you. And I promise it's quick, even though we're starting in the beginning. So in the beginning, there were scripts, and they were good, mostly. And before I go on, I will say that I do work with a lot of organizations that do still have a lot of scripts, but even in the beginning, I would argue there was the WAS admin console and doing all of your configuration management and all of your deployments and all of your tasks manually through many WAS admin consoles. So arguably in the beginning, there was the WAS admin console and scripts. But are scripts fragile? Are they easily broken? Are they those bulls in a china shop, charging ahead, changing everything in their path? And yes, they are. Gartner talks a lot about the fragility of scripts, and time again, when Robin and I work with organizations, we see that these scripts are bulls in a china shop. They do exactly what you tell them to, good or bad. And if there's something bad in that script, it just does that bad thing faster and proliferates it more quickly. We've also seen a lot of examples of people deploying typos, and yes, I purposefully misspelled this. And again, a lot of times people will write scripts quickly to do a break fix. For example, something's broken, maybe a performance problem, an availability problem, a security problem, and instead of fixing that break, they end up doing what we call a break worse. Now, best case, you may find some performance problems down the line, maybe a couple weeks, a month. You start getting tickets in saying something's not performing exactly the way it should be, or far worse, you experience that outage. And this is not just in theory. You guys see this all the time in articles, even on the news, websites offering free products accidentally, people accidentally deleting the whole database by just fat fingering a configuration change, websites being down for hours, security vulnerabilities. So executing scripts can actually have a really detrimental effect on your environment in certain cases. Also, scripting is not free. We have done surveys, and one of the responses that we've gotten is that more than 50% of people, I'm sorry, 33% say they spend more than 50% of their time writing and maintaining scripts. So instead of maybe necessarily doing their job, they're spending over half their time writing those automation scripts or maintaining the automation scripts that were written. And scripting is not risk-free either. When we asked respondents, how do you maintain your scripts when the author is no longer available, 30% said it's a problem. There is no viable solution in place. And a lot of people Robin and I work with have come to us because a person or persons have scripted a configuration management solution or a deployment solution, and then they've either moved to another team or they've left the company, and no one knows how to edit what they've written. So I've even hit an extreme case where a configuration management solution was not touched for 4 years because they were scared that anytime they touched it, it would break. And they finally came to us and said, we just can't do it anymore. We can't maintain these scripts. The people that wrote it left. We need something that's more off the shelf. So in summary, scripting was the best available option of the 20th century, assuming you were lucky enough to script it correctly and assuming you were lucky enough to have the scripts. I do, like I said, hit a lot of organizations that are still using the WAS admin console to do a lot of their configuration management.
Yeah, and on top of that, you've also have the instruction through spreadsheets if they're even working with scripts, and then also if the instructions are bad or if something's mistyped, you still
I forgot about that.
have all those issues introduced as well.
Yeah, that actually reminds me, I was working with an organization a couple of weeks ago even, and they have all of their PCI compliance checklists written in an Excel spreadsheet put on SharePoint, and they do manual audits, and they'll go to just one D manager or one area and do those checks and say, okay, then everything must look good. So yes, I forgot to mention the spreadsheet.
Right, yeah.
All right, and then today we come into the semi-automated era, or as I would really argue, the semi-manual era. And this is the era where we have a lot of automation frameworks available to us, whether they're open source or they're commercial, but it's this promise of automation that you end up having to script most of it anyway, right? So instead of just having your scripts, you now have an automation framework to put them in, but you're still writing and maintaining your scripts through it.
And if you're lucky enough, some of them might have some kind of scripting template, which you can
Yes.
start with as a baseline and then build on top of that. But yeah.
But plug and play is
right.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So today, to deploy a change in these automation frameworks, you're still having to search for modules, maybe from the open source community, or doing a Google search to find modules that fit your needs. Select the best fitting thing. And I know this checklist is tedious, guys, but I go through it because, well, it's a tedious process. You know, you're checking for updates, you're investigating support options. If the module doesn't work, is there anywhere I can go for someone to help me? You're checking for environment dependencies, inspecting each line for security, editing the module, scripting it, testing it, deploying it, and documenting it, and then hoping the author doesn't leave. So there's still all these steps that need to be done within automation framework solutions. And then oftentimes, someone needs to be trained on the scripting language that's used in those automation frameworks, whether it's a declarative language or something like Ruby. Oftentimes, it's not necessarily in a language that WebSphere admins are comfortable writing in.
Right. So ultimately, the point we're trying to communicate here is that you're still building up these silos of knowledge within the organization, and you're still sort of investing in this scripting IP that is dedicated just to your sole task that you're trying to accomplish. And then whenever something in the process changes, you still have to go through the whole life cycle of maintaining and modifying that IP that you've put into these automation solutions.
Right, right. And I think of the example, I was speaking with someone at a conference not too long ago, and they had an off-the-shelf automation framework, and it took them 3 years to get everything exactly the way they wanted it, and it worked really well for them. It was really powerful. And another team came to him and said, wow, you guys did this. This is great. I want to do this too. It didn't work for their team. And the guy said, well, I wrote it for our team. You're going to have to start from scratch.
Yeah, you build it with a certain endpoint in mind,
right,
that you're designing your automation towards, and then you lose flexibility once you do that.
Exactly, exactly. All right, and here comes tomorrow, that WebSphere application server earthquake, the good earthquake. And instead of focusing at that operating system, that server level, we find that a lot of automation framework tools really focus at this operating system level, and then have tried to go up higher into the stack. These new age tools will focus from the app down. They will focus on the application ecosystem, the middleware, the database, and then move into the OS if necessary. And what I like to point out here is, what I find is your CIO, your manager, your teams, they don't care if server 100 is up and running. They care if your business critical, customer facing application is performing secure and up. And so I don't necessarily care about the operating system. I don't necessarily care about the server. I care about the application and the middleware and database it runs on and how that's performing and configured. All right, what would a webinar be without a car analogy? I've got to do it. I've got to do it. So to kind of bring this all together, in that manual era, we thought we were automated. We thought we were Fred Flintstone with the car and driving with our feet. And then as we moved into this semi-automated era, I like to say that that's kind of when we were driving manual transmissions. But we are moving more into a modern, intuitive interface environment where we have the driverless cars, the hands-free driving, where that domain knowledge is built in, where it's tested, where it's scalable, and it's extendable. And you don't have to know how to drive it. You don't have to do anything. You just get in and go. And why is this important? Automation, we've talked a lot about that. Automation is important, yes. You can do that with scripts. Control is important, being able to know who did what, when, where, why, who approved it. But I would argue that the most important thing still is visibility. I go into a lot of organizations that say, I'm fully automated, but if something goes wrong for some reason, and it does, it happens to everybody, inevitably something will happen. I have no visibility into what happened or why, and it takes me a long time to figure out how to fix it. So I'll be showing you guys in the demo today a lot around visibility.
So one of the things as well we want to sort of identify with this new age solution is when we're doing a deployment or what have you. For the most part, in today's tools, you just have the applications and the configurations, and it's being deployed into some ecosystem, typically identifying the server, what goes where and whatnot. However, in the next stage sort of application scenario we're looking at, we're going to introduce this sort of feedback loop where the applications and configurations, the sort of workflow that you are executing to deploy these, is aware of that environment that you're deploying into, and then can make the appropriate intelligent decisions based on that information that's coming from that environment. So if it's making a specific change to some setting, some configuration, then it's aware of what else is going to be affected by that and can make the correct decision as to what that configuration setting should be, and maybe alert specific teams or members as to what's going on, why it's going on, and how something might be affected as well. So it's very important to have that sort of continuous feedback loop and that visibility into the environments that you're deploying into for your applications, so that things can successfully continue to execute properly.
Yes, and spoiler alert, that will be what we're showing in the demo.
That's our goal, that's our target.
All right, in summary, we're going to take you, in what you're trying to do is get from legacy scripts, from homegrown tools and point solutions, which ultimately keep you in technical debt, and be that bridge to get you to mode 2 operations. Everyone is looking, from how to get from point A to point B. I'm trying to move from traditional over to cloud. I'm trying to move from traditional over to container, and they need that bridge to help them support not only the legacy, but also those mode 2 operations. With that said, I'm going to show you a demo of Orca, which addresses the concepts Robin and I just discussed. This is the example of us shaking up the configuration management world. You'll see the automation we talked about, you'll see the visibility we talked about, as well as the governance and control.
And the application-centric visibility and design and layout, so that...
And what I want to stress is what you're about to see is completely 100% out of the box. And that's why we talked a lot about the automation frameworks. Is with Orca, you're not going to have to write scripts or maintain scripts to be able to manage your WebSphere application server configurations. You get Orca and it's already all there out of the box for you.
Yeah, but that being said, if there is specific scripting IP you've already invested in and you want to maintain, there is a way to maintain that within Orca as well, as you migrate into this more sort of standardized management mechanism. Yeah.
Definitely, but I will say a lot of companies I work with, they're still working in the log admin console.
Yeah,
and if they have nothing, this is a great place to get immediate automation and visibility.
Right.
I'm here in Orca. This is a web-based user interface. I'm logged in as an administrative user that can see and do all things. But keep in mind that Orca has all of the governance and control I talked about, integrating with things like Active Directory, having user restrictions and permissions being granted, working with AD groups, and being able to have customizable dashboards. So do keep in mind that this is potentially a multi-team tool. You may want your configuration management team to be in here, but maybe you also want DBAs to have access or managers to have some sort of access and have their own dashboard into this type of information. What you're seeing here on the screen is a live rendering of what's going on in my environment. And the green circles, let me take the customer portal application, for example. You can see this is my customer portal application. Is anything in green is in compliance, or in other words, the configuration is what you expect it to be. Anything in red is your hotspot. It's your heat map. For example, in customer portal, I can see I'm doing great in my lower environments. Acceptance is great, QA is great, development is great, but I have a problem in my North America data center, my production environment, and that issue is in my WebSphere application server cell.
So just to make you aware, if you were observing, the sort of title of the box Christy was navigating through was changing as she was hovering over each of these different ecosystems or environments. So
yes.
See what you're actually looking at.
And the demo scenario we're showing today is what Robin was showing before in the slides. This is a great place to come maybe before you release your application into an environment, or maybe once it's been released into production, or maybe you're moving it from dev to QA to production, and you want to know before a release or after a release, do my configurations look the way they need to look? Am I in compliance? Have I drifted from the expected value? And what I can see here is before I go to release this application into production, I have a WebSphere configuration issue I need to address. So let me dive in here. As long as I have permission to do so, I can click on this node here and it takes me down into what I like to call the nerd view. And that's where I get all of that low level configuration information. You can see that my view of the ecosystem has changed here on the left. It's more of a file folder structure view where I can see my application customer portal that lives in development, it lives in QA, it lives in acceptance and production. And I've created this from an application-centric point of view, but if you are a WebSphere admin and you would prefer to have things based on cells or profiles or servers, you can do that as well. This is a fully customizable area on the left. But what you're seeing here on the screen is the last time Orca pulled a configuration for WebSphere was at 9:21 a.m. this morning. Orca keeps a full revision history every time it pulls in the configuration. And the last time it pulled in the configuration at 9:21, it found that there were issues in that environment. Before I dive into this configuration data, I want to show you how we got here and how easy it was to get here. The only thing you need to tell Orca is where your deployment manager is. In this case, my deployment manager is sitting on WAS server 1. Tell Orca that it is a WebSphere environment. And from those two things, Orca auto-populates this inventory list, which is all of the things supported out of the box for WebSphere. I'll tell you everything configuration-wise is supported here, everything from application servers to even your IHS web servers, to your virtual host, your node agents, your cell information, and I'm choosing to pull all of this information back into Orca. On a schedule, Orca will go pull this information from the cell. Depending on the size of the cell, it'll take a different amount of time, but for my particular cell, that inventory of the configuration runs in about 42 seconds. And returns in what we like to call the human readable map. So no one needs to understand XML, no one needs to understand a specific language to be able to see this configuration data. Let me just dive into some of this here so you can see what this looks like. Let's look at some JDBC resources. I've got an Oracle JDBC provider. And so you notice that as I dive down in here, I can see all of the configuration data, all the data sources, the scope, and Orca tries very hard to maintain the same visual structure that you would see if you went to the WAS admin console. It just makes it easier to adopt and have that visibility in Orca.
And all these settings and properties are searchable as well. So if there's a specific property you know about that you want to find the value for, you can just search for it via that search box at the top, and the Orca will show or bring you straight to that. Or if there's many of those, say you're searching for port and you wanted to find out where ports are used, you can just put in port and then you can sort of iterate through each of those within the config tree.
And anything you see here that is a link can be changed through Orca. So this is your visibility part, and then Orca also does all of the configuration change automation. And we do configuration change in a very smart way. Names obviously are strings, but in the case of maybe needing to restart a JVM, let me just kind of dive down in here to that. Any time only a specific value is accepted, we provide a drop-down or a Boolean or whatever it is that needs to be there to show you what the applicable values are, so you don't accidentally typo something that might have happened, say, if you were writing a script. The other thing you can do is, and this is a really big use case we get all the time. Let's say you've deployed an application into an earlier environment, or you have a WebSphere configuration in an earlier environment that's working really well, and then you deploy into production and the application doesn't work. That never happens, right? We get a lot of people wanting to compare between environments. How does this WebSphere environment compare against the QA environment or the development environment? And it's really easy to see with Orca because of the way we're pulling back the data and managing the data. All I have to do is click this compare to link, and let's say I want to compare it to the development environment. I just click this WAS cell in development, compare selected nodes, and it's going to create a comparison report that shows me all the differences between the development environment and the production environment. And I can choose any point in time to do the comparison against. Let's say development has come to you and said, well, I've been messing around with the WebSphere cell in development, but everything looked great on 629. You can go back to that revision and compare that revision in development to the production environment and see very, very easily that for one of your data sources in one of your JDBC providers, the port number is different between environments.
And then you can also do a comparison of the same environment between two different points in time to see exactly what changed between that point in time and the present time, or even two different points in time.
Yeah. Someone tells you all they did was install an application, but your heap sizes have changed, your verbose GCs changed, all these things have randomly changed. Yes. Right. So this is your CYA, right? This is that instant visibility, instant comparison, and it's also operational. Anything that you see here, you can check the check mark and say apply to and apply values from one environment to the other. But let's go back here. I want to show you, I alluded to seeing red. I have not explained what that red is yet, but I want to explain that now before we fix the issue so we can then release the application into this environment. If I dive down, I see I have an issue with my application server and specifically within the JVM. And from here, I have the initial heap size being incorrect and the max heap size is also incorrect. And the way Orca determines that is through what we call drift, whether it's drift from a gold master or drift from a revision. Orca always compares the configuration it's pulling back to that of the gold master and saying it looks different than it's supposed to. In this case, I am always comparing this configuration against what was pulled during the last release. The last release to this environment was 4.2.4, and anytime Orca pulls a configuration after the 4.2.4 release, I want to compare it to that last point in time to make sure no one's going in and manually changing it through a script, not knowing. So that way when I release 4.2.5, I know that no configuration changes have been made that I don't know about. In this case, of course, we have the issues tab as well that again shows the same things. The heap sizes are different. According to the Gold Master revision, the baseline is 512, but the initial heap size has been changed to 256. It's too low. And the max heap size has been changed to 1024, but it's supposed to be 2048. What I'm showing you here may seem simple, but I have seen it take people months to find these issues. I've seen people roll back releases because they can never find the configuration changes that are causing a performance issue or an outage or something of that nature. This is a very powerful screen. And if I need to see things in line with my other configuration data, I just click on it and it takes me right to that line item in my configuration data section. And as well, Orca does compliance rules. If you don't necessarily have a drift standard, or if you do have a drift standard, but you also have compliance to maintain, you can create compliance rules within Orca. For example, this initial heap size must always be between 256 and 1024. If it's not, Orca marks it as being out of compliance as well as potentially drifted. Again, if you have PCI compliance, SOX compliance, performance compliance, anything like that that you need to put into Orca, you can do so through these compliance rules, and Orca will tell you if they're out of compliance. From here, I'm going to remediate this drifted configuration. Orca does have an auto-remediate capability if you're looking for more of that desired state configuration where if it's broken, fix it. Don't tell me about it, just do it, send me an email afterward. Or maybe in a production environment, you want more visibility. You can click this remediate button when you're ready. That remediate button will take you to a preview screen. And going back to the slide, this is where you get that governance, that control, that audit-ready capability. Shows you which cells affected, what workflow is going to be executed, who needs to sign off, and then what configurations are changing to bring it back into a known good state. From here, I could edit this job. I could do a dry run, which is a no-op. I could schedule it for later, or I can execute it, which is what I'm going to do now. And you can see I immediately go into sign-off mode. If I go to the details tab here and do a little refresh, my sign-off link is now active. And I guess one thing I haven't mentioned is if you do have an ITSM system that you use that you're expected to put change requests in for, Orca does integrate with those ITSM systems. So instead of maybe using our internal approval, you would see ServiceNow sign-off. And Orca would have created the change request with all of the information in it and waited for the appropriate approval within ServiceNow, for example. But for now, I'm going to use Orca's internal approval mechanism. We're going to come in here and say, Robin said this change is okay. It's all on you, Robin.
Oh, thanks.
And then we do have required fields, one of fields, notify only. I'll say what I see most common is people using Active Directory groups and putting the Active Directory group in the one of. So as long as one person from that group signs off, it's good to go. And in this case, since one of is Christy and Dave, when I approve, it's going to go to an overall approved state. So the overall status is accepted, and then that remediation is going to begin. And while that runs, it's going to take just a few minutes. I'm going to show you one that's already been executed so you can see what kind of logs Orca brings back. So let's see here. I've got to remediate from this morning, it looks like. And before I exit off the screen, this is a great one to talk about. It shows you every user who's kicked off any job, when it was kicked off, how long it lasted. And if you do schedule things for the future, we'll show you estimates on how long we think it will take based on past experience. This is a great report to be able to come and see who's doing what and what the load on the system is. When I dive in here, I can see all of the logs. Orca passes back all of the validation logs as well as all of the commit logs, all of the WS admin messages. Anytime we make WebSphere configuration changes, we are doing it through .client.props file, or you can use Orca to pass the appropriate credentials based on the environment you're deploying to. I wanted to make sure and say it. Yep, I'm preempting the question. We do get that a lot. But we also tie the logs with all the details. So at any point in time, you can come back and you can say, this is when I executed it, this was the cell, this was the approver, this was what configuration was affected. All right.
Yeah, it all gets back down to the visibility of what changed, when it changed, how it changed.
So I'm going to come here. This job is still running. When it's done running, Orca will do another inventory and make sure that it's been in a good state. So you'll see another inventory coming up here in a minute. While we wait on that, I do want to just make a comment that Orca supports more than just WebSphere application server. When I'm talking with WebSphere admins, they're not necessarily responsible for the OS layer, but they may need to keep an eye on it. For example, I've seen cases where the underlying file system has changed in some way. Maybe the permissions have changed, or the owner or the group has changed and they don't know about it. And that could potentially be causing an issue with log files or runtime issues or something of that nature. And so Orca does pull in that information as well. We can pull in all sorts of file system info, mode, owner, group, size, and then of course continually monitor for changes on that as well. So even if you're not responsible for making changes to this, you have visibility into it. Same goes for your DBAs. If your DBAs are comfortable with you having visibility into the database supporting your applications, Orca can pull in the schema, the database configuration information, and you now have visibility into how the database, the backend database, is changing over time. All right, two other things I want to show, and then I think we'll wrap up and move into questions. At the beginning of this demonstration, Robin mentioned something about flexibility. And everything you're seeing, like I said, is out of the box, but we do want to make sure you have enough flexibility to be able to add stuff yourself. And so we have this user scripts area. And this is where you can add your own user scripts if you have something very specific that you want to use to deploy an application or make a configuration change or inventory something specific. Let me look. We'll just dive into one of them. This is just a simple example. We do have out-of-the-box examples here, but any interpreted language is supported, and you can see here how easy it is to put your IP into Orca, and then have some governance around who can edit the scripts, who can push out the scripts, who can do what. You can even version them. So I just wanted to make a comment on that. All right, and then last thing I wanted to show is executing a workflow. Let's make a routine configuration change. We've shown in Orca how you can detect drift, how you can fix the drift, how you can see other things, but there's that routine configuration change you may be wanting to do. And for example, maybe I wanted to make a configuration change to this WAS cell in production. I can say execute from here. I can say create workflow. That takes me to a job area where I can build up a configuration change workflow. Let's say in this case, I want to create a new application server. Maybe that's something I want to do through Orca. All I have to do is drag and drop in this activity. Orca pulls the latest configuration it has for that environment, and you can use that to either make changes to the existing application servers. Let's see. Maybe I want to change the state to started. Maybe I want to change something else about this. We'll disable trace. But maybe also I want to create that new application server. Orca gives you the ability to do that. And all of this, again, out of the box, create new application server. You can create these templates. And let's call this Robin's application server.
Awesome.
We pull in the node information, and then we can click save. And of course, like I said, you can create templates out of this. You can save flows and reuse them in different WebSphere environments. But notice now I have a new application server I'm going to be installing when I run this, or creating whenever I run this workflow.
And because Christy initiated this workflow from that environment level container within Orca, if any, say, system services needed to be restarted as part of this sort of workflow, then she has the capability to add those sort of workflow steps into this job.
Exactly. Yeah, you can execute any command, you can execute any script. If you had a database change that needed to happen as part of this, you could drag and drop the DB2 role in, for example, and make the database change. Or like Robin said, you could drag and drop your Linux OS in and restart a service. Most often what I see with WebSphere is wanting to restart or start that JVM, but you have all of these fantastic options with the workflow. You can save it, you can rerun it, you can templatize it. I'm going to schedule this for later so you can see what the calendar looks like. So we're going to say schedule was changed to production. I can type.
Yeah, and the good thing about these workflows is that once it's saved as a workflow, you can reuse the workflow. Say you wanted to, or you constructed it in the dev environment, and you can use the same workflow to initiate the deployment or change through QA and into production or other environments as well. So you're reusing that same methodology that you used in one environment to do the same changes in different environments.
Correct, yes. And you can see that this was scheduled on the calendar. Something else I haven't really mentioned up until now is this is a really great calendar to also manage your blackout windows, your maintenance windows, and to see all of the jobs that other people have run, whether it was scheduled or not. It always goes on the calendar. So you can see I've run 4 things today already, and that tomorrow I have a blackout for my reliability application. If I look at the week view, I can see even more info. For example, from 10 to 4 p.m. tomorrow, if anyone in Orca tried to execute anything against the reliability app, it would wait until after the blackout period was over or go through a special blackout approval process. Oftentimes I run into calendars that are viewer only, and Orca adheres to the maintenance windows and blackouts in the calendar from an automation perspective. Anything I missed, Robin?
That's a pretty good coverage.
I don't want to go too in depth.
Yeah, we can easily overload people with information.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we need to sort of maintain at a high level while still delivering quality of information. So.
And we were able to cover the high level topics today: drift, remediate, visibility, governance and control, approvals, calendar, making routine configuration changes, and workflow. And I will say to the audience, if there's something that you didn't see that you want to see.
I guess the only thing we really didn't touch on are some of the high-level reports that come out of the box, and some of the reports that we can construct.
Yeah, there's a lot of
there's
a lot of reporting, and I guess suffice it, we could go through all the reports. We'll say for now there are reports.
Lots of reports.
There's lots of reports. You can see how well you're doing on compliance over time, how well you're doing on drift over time. I did show one screen where it shows who's executing what and when. Yeah. But there's reports on available, and then you can access some of those from the dashboard as well through certain widgets. But that is good to mention because there are a lot of automation solutions that lack that reporting capability. What I was going to say, though, is if there's something you didn't see, feel free to put it in the question box. Also, we do custom demos. If you want your team to see this and you have specific use cases, we do have a request demo area on our website, which is orcaconfig.com. I'll go there right now. And you can just say you listen to this webinar and you want your team to see it, and these are the use cases you'd want us to cover. All right, with that said, I'm going to take some questions. Let me pull up the question box here.
Once you're sort of parsing through those, I just want to reiterate that everything we did in WebSphere today was completely out of the box with Orca. So there was no sort of interacting with Jython or any WebSphere console, and no interacting directly by a user on any system. So it's all just done through the Orca UI. And so, as you can imagine, it's a very quick learning curve. And if you need to bring or expand your team, the training of those team members is very quick in order to be able to become productive.
Yes, I do see people picking it up very quickly when we work with individuals, whether it's remotely or on site. Within the first few hours, they're able to navigate, create the ecosystems and the nodes themselves, and then use the documentation to. Yep. But we're always here to help. And in fact, you made a comment through the UI. One of the questions we have here is if we have an API. And I will say that we are actually an API first product. Anything you saw us do through the user interface today can be done through the API. It is a REST-based JSON API. And we do have an API guide and examples as well. Right. Common things would be, say you had a deployment solution in place, a deployment automation solution in place, and you wanted to use that part of that workflow to have it reach out to Orca to check if things were in compliance before the deployment takes place. That's an example API script you could use to make sure everything's good.
So coming from the build system, typically people initiate a deployment right after the build, either to a QA system or automated testing. And so many people use the API to initiate that deployment.
Yes.
After the build.
Yeah, and we didn't talk a lot about it today. We really focused on configuration management, but Orca does have that application deployment capability as well. All right. The other question I have is if we use an agent, and so in the case of WebSphere application server in D, we typically only need an agent on the deployment manager. It is written in native C, so it's a very small footprint, about 8 megs of overhead. It sits in passive mode about 99.9% of the time, maybe.
Depending on the workload, yeah.
Depending on the workload, but yes, it's a very low footprint agent with no prereqs. And like I said, in the case of WebSphere, we typically only need that on the D manager. Next question I have is, do you support other middleware environments? And the answer is yes. We focused, of course, only on WAS today, but we have out-of-the-box support for things like Tomcat and JBoss and In the Windows world, IIS, SQL Server, DB2, IHS, we didn't show a lot of IHS, Apache. And if you want, you can go to our website and there are a list of supported interfaces. All right, the next question I have is, which ITSM integrations do you support out of the box? Out of the box, we have ServiceNow and Sharewell. Not to say we're limited to just those two, but those are the two most common and the two that we run, that we partner with and get the most, have the most people using. And another question I have is, for deployment, can you support rolling pools? The answer is yes. We have integrations with things like F5 to be able to support rolling deployments. I typically run into that more on, less on the WebLogic or WebSphere side, more on the Windows side, or more on the Tomcat JBoss side. But yes, we do support that interaction and that zero downtime type deployment. Well, with that said, we're at about 45 after. I don't want to keep everyone. If I did not answer your question, we will answer it after via email. And with that, I will hand it back over to Alan.
Hey, thanks very much. I think that was a pretty amazing demonstration. I hope everyone enjoyed it. It looks like we had some good questions. If that, Christy, if that's it, and I don't see any other questions either right now in my control panel, we'll call it a wrap. Before we do, though, I want to thank Orca for sponsoring today's webinar. It was an excellent webinar, and I want to thank both Christy and Robin for taking the time to take a deep dive here with us. Too many times with webinars we get a lot of marketing kind of talk. It's good to really roll up the sleeves and dive in on these things. So guys, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan. We appreciate the time.
All righty. This will be available. This webinar was recorded. It'll be up on DevOps TV and DevOps.com within 24 hours. So feel free, you can go back and take a look at it, everyone. Until our next webinar, this is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. Have a great day, everyone.